I'm ready.
Good evening. We're calling to order the regular meeting of the Police Advisory and Accountability Committee for the City of San Rafael. Welcome, everyone. Lieutenant Eberly, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair Kamina. Member Alm,
Present.
Member Alvarez,
Present.
Member DeViti,
Present.
Member Nguyen, Member Ruiz,
Present.
Vice Chair Tokalahi,
Present.
Chair Kamina,
Present?
Member Locks, and Member Valdez.
Present.
Great. Thank you, Lieutenant Eberly. Do you want to give the interpretation about public comment and so forth?
I will, thank you.
Thank you.
Before we begin, we'd like to announce that tonight's meeting will include Spanish language simultaneous and consecutive interpretation provided by qualified interpreters on the
Antes de
Spanish.
empezar, nos gusta.
Pedro, your line will be right after mine.
Yes, I apologize.
No problem. If you are watching on Zoom, you can join the Spanish channel by clicking on the interpretation icon in the Zoom toolbar. It looks like a globe. If you are attending in person and don't have access to the Zoom meeting from your mobile device, please come and see me and I will get you set up with a device so you can listen to the meeting in Spanish. As a reminder, we ask that everyone participating tonight speak slowly and allow our interpreters to effectively express your comments.
Antes de comenzar, nos gustaría anunciar que la junta de hoy tendrá una interpretación constante y simultánea en español. Usted puede accesar y está viendo Zoom, puede llegar haciendo clic al icono de Zoom en el barra de herramientas que parece un globo terráqueo. Si usted está atendiendo en persona y no tiene acceso a Zoom desde su teléfono, por favor venga y le ayudaré a que su teléfono esté listo para escuchar la traducción. Como un recordatorio, le pedimos a todos que participen el día de hoy, que hablen lentamente para darle la oportunidad a su intérprete que haga una interpretación efectiva.
Thank you.
One more, sorry. This meeting tonight is being recorded and members of the public watching online or listening by phone can call 669-444-9171 using the meeting ID 898-5264-7245#. There will be an opportunity for public comment for those participating in person. Each person will have 2 minutes to provide their comments, and we invite each of you to introduce yourselves by name before presenting your comments. We are offering closed captioning for this evening's meeting on Zoom. Select the live transcript button on Zoom to enable this feature. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the first item is for us to consider the meetings from the meeting of February 21st, 2024. I'll just go down the line. Does the committee have any questions about the minutes?
No questions.
No? Okay. No questions? Do you have any questions? Mr. Top, no, Vice Chair?
No
Mr.
questions.
Fatai? Ms. Nguyen, do you have any questions? Ms. Locks? No? Is there public comment on the minutes? No, seeing none, I'll close the public comment. I would request a motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes, if someone will do that.
I'll make the motion to approve.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Lieutenant Eberly, will you call the roll vote, please?
Yes. Member Alm,
Approve.
Member Alvarez,
Approved.
Member Davidi,
Approve.
Member Nguyen, Member Ruiz,
Approved.
Vice Chair Tokalahi,
Approve.
and Chair Kamina.
Approve. So the minutes are approved. Thank you so much. Tonight we have two presentations, and our first is on the Public Safety Officer's Procedural Bill of Rights. And Attorney Mark Wilson, who's an attorney for Burke, Williams, and Sorensen, is going to make our presentation. Would you like to begin that now? Thank you.
There we go. Good evening, committee members. I'm Mark Wilson with Burke Williams Sorensen. I am going to go over what's known as the Police Officer Bill of Rights. I'll share my presentation. I'd like to first apologize. As you can hear, I've lost my voice a little bit, so I apologize. I will try to speak as clear as possible. If you need to repeat myself, please do not hesitate to ask. So let me pull this up and make sure everyone can see this. Okay, can everyone see? Perfect. So tonight I'm going to speak about the Police Officer Bill of Rights. And as a way of background, I'm a labor and employment attorney that represents municipalities in all their interactions with labor unions throughout the state. And really what happens with POBR, and as we talk about what POBR really is a bill that codifies the rights that all union employees have in other areas and codifies them in the California Government Code. And what I mean by that, all government employees, before they are dismissed from work, have what's known, I'm sure you guys may have heard it, called a Skelly hearing or Skelly rights. That's codified in the Police Officer Bill of Rights. And then all union employees throughout the country have what are known as Weingartner rights, which is a right to a representation during any interview that may lead to discipline. And really, at the end of the day, the Police Officer Bill of Rights gives police officers these rights, and it's codified into law. And so what I want to do is walk through what's exactly codified in California law and kind of from a 3,000-foot overview, give you the who, what, when, where, and why of how POBR works. And so that's my plan. So to begin with, who's covered by the Police Officer Bill of Rights? So obviously police officers are covered by the Police Officer Bill of Rights. That really includes sheriffs, undersheriffs, deputy sheriffs. For tonight's meeting, I think it's important. It's any police officer employed by a city or other municipality safety agency. What it does not apply to is in part probationary officers. And as we move through this evening, you'll see that there's certain rights under Police Officer Bill of Rights, which are mainly rights during questioning and interrogation that may lead to discipline. Then there are what are called appeal rights. If someone needs to appeal any adverse employment action that they may receive, whether it's a letter of reprimand, a suspension, or a termination. Now here, POBR does not apply to your probationary employees when it comes to discipline. They are not entitled under POBR any rights to an appeal hearing if they are disciplined. Now, they may be awarded rights in personnel rules or through an MOU, but police officers, probationary police officers are generally not covered by POBR, but all other sworn individuals are covered by POBR. And when I say POBR, Police Officer Bill of Rights, that typically people refer to it as POBR, or you may hear POBR. So either one. So when does it apply? We have who it applies to. So it applies anytime an officer is under investigation or subject to interrogation by a commanding officer regarding anything that could lead, and this is the key word, to punitive action. And punitive action means anything that may lead to dismissal, demotion, suspension, or, and this is the key word here, reduction in salary. At the end of the day, if it's an adverse action, if you're going to lose money, or if you get what's called a letter of reprimand in your file. It does not apply to routine counseling, to if you are giving on the job, if a commanding officer is giving on the spot feedback, it doesn't apply then. It really only kicks in when you are being specifically asked about a specific disciplinary matter. Typically, it kicks in when you receive a complaint. So we have who is covered and when it applies. So what applies? So I think a lot of times people hear Police Officer Bill of Rights and they think it is a huge bit of rights that officers are granted. Really, at the end of the day, the Police Officer Bill of Rights awards someone who's covered the right to representation during an interrogation. And it's a right to representative of their choice. However, it cannot be someone who is the subject of the investigation. And this can come up a lot when an officer who is the subject and is being interrogated, they want to be represented by a union member, a fellow union member. Well, if that union, that is fine and absolutely allowed, unless that union member is also the subject of the investigation. Then that is what applies during it. And I just want to make sure I covered everything before I moved on. So how the interrogation act works. So under the Police Officer Bill of Rights, you can't just call an officer into an interrogation or into an interview. You have to provide them written notice that it gives them several bits of information. And one, they need to be reasonably informed of what the subject matter of the investigation is. It doesn't need to give them in great detail. It needs to allow the officer or sergeant or anyone who's covered. I apologize. Often I use officer as just someone who's covered. But the officer has to be informed of the nature of the investigation in order to allow them to reasonably consult with their attorney or representative of choice. So they have to have enough material to say, okay, this is what the investigation is about. You do not need to go into detail. They are certainly not entitled to the questions or the complaint itself, even at the stage of interrogation. They are also entitled to know the rank and command of the officer in charge of the interrogation, the interrogating officers, and any other person present. And this is key. The law specifically says that they can only be interviewed by 2 officers unless they consent. So that is what needs to be in the notice that is provided to the officer. And you have to provide the officer reasonable time to get an attorney of its choice. And reasonable time does not mean an indefinite amount of time, but it also doesn't mean you can only give them 24 hours. Case law suggests a good rule of thumb is about a week and a half is a reasonable time for them to get representation and schedule the interrogation. Also, it has to be conducted at a reasonable hour. It has to be on duty unless the seriousness of the investigation requires otherwise. If it's off duty, the officer must be compensated. So how that works in practice, say if you have an officer who is assigned to graveyards, then typically you would have that officer come in during the days, just make sure that they're compensated during that time period. You just can't have them do it by law on their own time. But that's the exact same thing that you can't do with any government employee or any union member. So again, this is just codifying what is provided through case law to other government employees and other union members. And then obviously you can't terminate a public safety officer for missing work because they were at an interrogation. Okay, during the investigation, So the officer under interrogation cannot be subject to offensive language or threatened with punitive action for not answering the questions. You can't tell that they are here under direct threats, under direct orders, and if they don't answer. But you can't say, you can't badger the officer with threats of punitive action if they don't give certain type of answer. You can't be, the officer cannot be subject to offensive language. And then they are also, and this is the same thing that happens to any government employee or any union member, there's a thing called a Libarger immunity and a Garrett statement. So if at any time the officer who's being interviewed is being interviewed about questions that may lead to criminal charges or any criminal misconduct, they have to be notified that their statement is being compelled as part of their job responsibilities, but that statement cannot be admissible in a court of law. However, that statement could be used to impeach the officer, but it cannot be used as underlying evidence for any criminal behavior. So that's what happens during the interrogation. And when I talk about during the interrogation, I talk about offensive language, that the case law suggests you can't badger the officer or any employee saying lines of questions of, well, how could you possibly have done something like that, et cetera, et cetera. They need to be factual based questions. But again, this is the same type of questions that you can ask any union member or any public sector employee. During the interrogation, this is one of the outliers that is different than, that is unique to public safety officers. By law, they are required to be able to record their investigation, and you are required to give them a copy of the recording if you are recording the investigation yourself. And so how that works as a practical matter, when a police officer is interviewed under Police Officer Bill of Rights, that interview is always recorded, and so are all the witness statements. And then if an adverse action is contemplated for that officer and they are proposed discipline, then they get a copy of those recordings. And then also, if the officer is entitled, if those recordings are transcribed, they are entitled to any notes from the transcriber, and they are also entitled to any notes that the interviewer may be drafting during the interview. And so that's an important thing for the interviewer to remember, that anything they write down is going to need to be turned over to the police officer. So after the interrogation, after the investigation, if there is punitive action contemplated, then that punitive action has to be proposed to the officer within 1 year that behavior was discovered by an officer who has the authority to implement discipline. So typically as that works, that's a commanding officer, a sergeant or a lieutenant. However, with all things in life, there's always exceptions. And so there are exceptions to that statute of limitations. If, for instance, there's underlying criminal charges, then the statute of limitations is told during that investigation. There's also a tolling period if there are multiple witnesses that require an unusual amount of interviews. Case law suggests it's actually not that many amount of witnesses that you need to trigger this exemption to the statute of limitations. It could be as few as 3 to 4 witnesses if it's somewhat of a complex fact pattern. Also, if there's multi-jurisdictional issues, if the fact pattern that's at issue with the interrogation involves different jurisdictions, which happens quite frankly often in Marin County, that could also toll the statute of limitations. And then you can also have a waiver if the officer agrees to waive the statute of limitations. This is not exhaustive list. Case law is rapidly evolving on the on the statute of limitations and on the extension of it. But these are kind of the high priority ones, so to speak. So, after the interrogation is over, under the Police Officer Bill of Rights, you are required to provide the officer with a proposed notice of the adverse action, whether that is a letter of reprimand, as I mentioned earlier, a suspension, or a termination. You have to provide them with a proposed notice that you are doing this action. Then you have to provide them with all information that was relied upon in that investigation. So that includes all the witness statements, the investigative report. Then they are entitled to an appeal. And that appeal is, I mentioned earlier, quite often government employees are used to the term a Skelly hearing. So they are entitled to an appeal where they are able to provide their side of the story. And so that is their appeal rights under the Police Officer Bill of Rights. After they have that appeal, after the decision makes its final decision, they have 30 days to serve that decision on the officer. So here I want to make sure it's clear, because you have a 1-year statute of limitations to notice the officer that there's going to be an adverse employment action. That cuts the statute of limitations off. There is no statute of limitations on how long the appeal could take. Theoretically, you could take as much time as you want, but once a decision is made by a commanding officer, by the chief, or by a department, then they have 30 days to serve that final notice. So I hope that makes sense. Then after the interrogation, stated that they have a right to appeal. I apologize, I kind of get ahead of myself and covered this slide. One thing I will note, the Police Officer Bill of Rights does not really apply to police chiefs, except in one instance, is that a police chief cannot be removed without a written notice and an opportunity for administrative appeal. And specifically, the code states that you can't remove a police chief unless you tell them that that the reasons that you're removing them from their post. However, interesting, the Police Officer Bill of Rights specifically says one of the reasons that you can provide is incompatible management style. So that is a pretty large catch-all. And you just have to provide chief notice, give them the opportunity for an administrative appeal. And that's where POBR applies to police officers. So I have talked about the two big things that really apply to police officers under POBR. It's their rights during an interrogation. And I've been saying the term interrogation a lot. That's anytime they're being interviewed or asked questions about something that could lead to discipline. And so they have the rights during that part. And then they have rights under Police Officer Bill of Rights that is about they have their right to appeal any punitive action. Then under Police Officer Bill of Rights, there are a few miscellaneous rights that are included that don't really fall within the interrogation or within the appeal rights. And I've listed them here. And so first, under POBR, the employer cannot search a public safety officer's locker or other space unless he is present or has been notified that the search will be conducted, or if you have a valid search warrant. You also cannot compel an officer to submit to a lie detector test. You cannot punish an officer for being on a Brady list. Now you can obviously seek discipline based on the underlying behavior that would get them on a Brady list, but you can't discipline an officer for being on the Brady list. Oh, of course, and I apologize. A Brady list is, so it comes from case law. A Brady list is, it's a list that the district attorney office has about any impeachable evidence that an officer may have. Essentially, if an officer was ever involved in misconduct that's relevant to the underlying charges. I hope that's a high level. But then personnel files, a public safety officer shall not have any adverse comments entered into their personnel file without them having the ability to first sign and read to read and sign the instrument containing the adverse employment action. This is the exact same thing that all employees, that are either public and non, in the private sector under the California Labor Code. If you put anything in any employee's personnel file, they have the right in California to put a rebuttal. And they have the right to do that within 30 days. And so that was a right that originally showed up in the Police Officer Bill of Rights, but it's been granted now to all employees, not just public sector unions. Then political activity. You cannot discipline a public safety officer for engaging in any protected political activity for speech, for supporting a political candidate. These are the same rights that the California Constitution awards all employees, as a matter of fact. Then a public safety officer should not have their photograph or their contact information given to the media without their express consent. And that's under Police Officer Bill of Rights. So those are some of the miscellaneous rights that are attached to an officer under the Police Officer Bill of Rights. So now that you have the interrogation rights, you have your adverse employment rights, you have your miscellaneous, how this is enforced, meaning if a city or a jurisdiction violates the POBR, officers have the right to immediately file a writ in Superior Court and ask for injunctive relief. They can get up to $25,000 in civil penalties. They can get actual damages, and they can get attorney fees. And here's the thing, they do not have to exhaust administrative remedies. So while the Police Officer Bill of Rights has pretty straightforward rights for an officer, if those rights are violated, it can be a costly mistake for cities because they can go right to Superior Court and get injunction, get $25,000 of civil penalty, and attorney fees are attached. And so that is why it's important for cities to ensure that their rights are, that they are doing interrogations and providing notices to officers in line with the law. But as I mentioned before, all of these rights are very similar to the same things that you have to do for all your union members. So I think it's important to remember as we're doing the process. So that is, I hope I stayed within my time limit. That is a 3,000-foot overview. And obviously, if any of the committee members have questions, I am more than happy to address them.
Chair Kamina, can I just 1 second to toggle the interpreter? Okay, we're all set. Thank you.
Okay, well, now would be the time for committee members. If they have any questions, maybe we'll start at the other end of the table. Alternate member Locks, do you have any questions about the presentation? Okay. Member Nguyen, do you have any questions? Okay. Mr. Davidi?
No, just a thank you for that detailed report despite your voice.
I apologize.
Member
Could we expand a little bit on the multi-jurisdiction and how the investigatory conversation would happen when we provided mutual aid to another city?
Sure. So it's important to realize the multi-jurisdictional, all it would do is extend the statute of limitations that you have to serve an officer with their adverse employment action. So say, for instance, if there was, and I'm just going to use a hypothetical completely out of nowhere that I'm making up on the spot. But say if you had an officer who was involved in some off-duty conduct in a remote jurisdiction, say Humboldt County, right? And there was videotape. It took a while to get videotape from some incident or something of that nature, then that would start triggering the multi-jurisdictional issue. It didn't happen on the clock to be here in San Rafael at the moment. Does that make, I know I'm being vague with that, because I want to make sure that actually answers your question, because I
A
don't
little
think it
bit,
does.
I guess, who's doing the investigating? The other jurisdiction or within
Oh,
ourselves?
so no, so say if it was jurisdiction, we'll just, let's use another jurisdiction, say San Rafael, just so it's easy. So say if it was in San Francisco Police Department was investigating off-duty conduct that happened in Humboldt County, that would trigger it, perhaps, because it's multi-jurisdiction. That happened in a different jurisdiction. Then that's one facet of that case law. Then, if there are other jurisdictions who are investigating it, then it could also trigger it as well, which sometimes can happen if you have, for instance, officer involved shooting that is multi-jurisdictional or use of force that's multi-jurisdictional, then because then you would have not only another jurisdiction, but you could also have the DA's office investigating, the sheriff's department investigating, their own internal affairs investigating, and that could be multi-jurisdictional on that part. So does that make sense? I apologize.
I think the question was, so is San Francisco the primary that's doing the investigation
It-
in that scenario that you gave?
So it could be both,
Okay.
right? I mean, so it's the chief.
Typically, if I could just add, I think
Please.
if I am honing in on your question, the employing agency is responsible for the administrative investigation. So in the Humboldt scenario, if there was a criminal act, that local jurisdiction, Humboldt Sheriff, would investigate the criminal act. The employing agency is responsible for investigating the
Yeah, it's
administrative.
fair. That's
Yeah.
a much better. Thank you, Chief.
That's why he's the chief.
Yeah, so and I apologize because that's almost for me. You would only be doing the internal investigation if you were the employee. So that's how, and so that's, thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Ms. Valdez, do you have any questions about this topic?
Yes, I'm a little bit confused about when the officer receives like the notification you mentioned about 30 days and then 1 year, so I got a little confused in that part.
Sure, and I apologize for any confusion. So, and let's make sure we're clear on the notice.
Mhm,
So the officer first has to receive a notice of the investigation,
mhm.
right? Then, if there's discipline resulting from that investigation, they need to be served with what's called a notice of intent to discipline. Then that has to be served within the 1 year statute of limitations,
Mhm.
right? Then that, as soon as they're served, the statute of limitations issue is resolved.
Mhm.
The clock stops running. However, it starts running again once the employing agency makes a final determination, then they have 30 days
Mhm.
to serve.
Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Do you have any other questions?
No.
Okay. Ms. Alvarez, do you have any questions?
No.
Okay. Ms. Ruiz?
Yes, I have a question. Can I say in Spanish?
Of course.
Please.
And Lieutenant Everly will facilitate.
Estoy confundida en la parte que dice que para los jefes de policía y los oficiales, ¿esto es diferente?
Marina, that's you. If you can translate that to English.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Can that question be repeated, please? It was hard to hear. ¿Puede repetir la pregunta, por favor?
Sí, si todo esto que nos está comentando él, hay una diferencia cuando un jefe de la policía comete un delito o tiene alguna falta, ¿es diferente la ley con ellos a los oficiales?
So with all of this all this information that we're receiving, I'm sorry, Pedro needs to not speak for 1 second, please. Okay. With all of this information that we're receiving, is there a difference when a police chief commits a crime or has misconduct as opposed to a regular officer?
No, there's no difference. The only difference would be a lot easier for the appointing authority, city manager, to release the chief.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions?
No. I'm okay, thank you.
Vice Chair? No question? I have one question, please, which is, I understand that the officer would have to be given notice before being interviewed so that they could get counsel or assistance. But what about the time between when the offending complaint occurs and the officer is interviewed? Are you able to put him or her on leave? What can be done while we're waiting to find out what happens?
That is a great question. And so you can place an officer on paid administrative leave at any moment for any reason. It's not considered an adverse employment action. So right now, the chief could, with not triggering any rights for any officer, could put any officer on administrative leave like that. So, because that is not considered an adverse employment action, as long as you ensure that they receive their current pay. That's the catch-all. So to answer your question, absolutely, when you see a complaint, it is departmental discretion and the right to place an officer on paid administrative leave right away, and you do not need to provide them notice of why they're placed on administrative leave. And typically, the best practice is not to. So, and if I could, typically what would happen if you saw a complaint that triggers some deep concerns, is going to trigger the whole IA process, you would typically immediately put that officer on paid administrative leave with a written notice of, as of today, you're placed on paid administrative leave. Please call in every day. So we
Right.
period. Then when it's time for his interview, that's when you would notice him of the scope of the interview, his right to get an attorney who's going to be noticing. Because
And-
typically
Okay.
you would interview that officer last.
And at what point does the paid leave become unpaid leave?
So you cannot, and this is with any government employee and any union employee, really, you cannot put them on unpaid leave until they've had a skelly.
Okay.
So until they have an appeal hearing.
Okay, thank you so much. I
Right?
appreciate
But
your
you can
time.
do it at that moment.
Okay, thank you. So now would be the time for public comment on this particular topic. Come forward, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. I just wanted to start off by thanking all of you for being here today on the committee. I know that this is a difficult job and it's a lot of work, as evidenced by the almost 100-page agenda packet that I'm sure everybody read over the weekend. So I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of work being put into this. The Bill of Rights was included in the agenda item, but the PowerPoint from the presentation was not. And I just wanted to say that I feel like it would have been useful to provide that to the committee members and also to the public. I don't know if you had access to that, but the print was really small and hard to read, and it would be good to have that for reference and to go back to later. going into the next agenda item as well, I just wanted to say before
Actually,
we started.
if you can have to
It's
save it
related.
until. you'll
No,
have-
it's okay, it's related. So, like I
Sorry.
said, this agenda item, the information was included in the packet in all of the languages, but for the upcoming agenda item, it wasn't. And there's a lot of preparation that goes into this, like I said, but for the Spanish-speaking packet, the information, the internal affairs, I don't remember what it's called, that wasn't included in the Spanish-speaking agenda packet. So not only are there committee members that speak Spanish, but there's also community members who follow along or are watching at home and want to be prepared on this information. And it's really important that all that information is provided to people in all of the languages. So that's a equity and an accessibility issue. And it's really important in order for everybody to participate fully in what's happening here at the meeting. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else on this topic, please? Or agenda item?
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Heidi. Thank you for the presentation, Mark. I think it would have been really helpful. Your presentation was a lot easier to follow than the legislation that's in our packets. So having the PowerPoint for folks to read in the packets and translated, I think would have helped a lot. I also I had a question if I were on the committee about whether the police department knows who's on the Brady list. And I do think, Mark, that your explanation was really high level. I wanted to read when I was reading the packet what I looked up. The California Brady list includes all known issues of police misconduct, do not call status, decertification, complaints, use of force. Oh, that's not the one I wanted to do. But it's about like if they have a history of not being believable, which is concerning for someone who's a police officer, or if they've been arrested for domestic violence, it might be a conflict of interest for them to testify in a case of domestic violence. And so I think it would be important to know if the police department knows who's on there, because in the presentation, Mark said that they can't be punished for being on the Brady list, but they can be punished for conduct related to being placed on the Brady list. And there were, if you looked at all the transparency page for SRPD, there are emails back and forth between the DA's office and the police department about Brandon Nail, who was involved in the brutal beating, and some inconsistencies and issues that I think it would be important for this committee to know about and look into. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you coming forward? Yes, we'll wait for you then. Thank you. Welcome and thank you for coming.
Jason from Gerstle Park. This is one softball question, I guess, for Mr. Wilson. I imagine it would come from the city, but like you said, it was only one way that a chief could get removed, and that was with a written notice. Would that come from a city? Or would that, I'm not sure where that would come from, and I just want a clarification on that. I also want to talk about, can you hear me all right? There we go. I want to talk about, how Mr. Wilson said that, the POBR, Police Officer Bill of Rights, there's a lot of not that many protections or, to that effect. And, police have a lot of protections with their Bill of Rights. I mean, a lot. And, there's an example of a Marin County Sheriff. He got a drunk driving, hit and run up in Rohnert Park. He didn't get fired. I don't know anybody that could drive a company vehicle, get a DUI and still retain a job, And then, Brandon Nail's appeal, the fact that he can appeal, I think his attorney said it best, Anthony Label. I can't think of any other profession where somebody could be terminated and facing criminal charges for assaulting a person while on the job then has the right to file an appeal to get reinstated. So right there, it just proves that there's a lot of rights, and I'm not sure I'm sure an ex-district attorney would agree with a lot of rights for police, but I'm not sure what the PAC can do about that. But I guess hearing an explanation of their police officers' rights is a way to start, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public? Mr. Garcia? Turn my timer off. Welcome.
Gracias, buenas tardes a todos. Sí, solo es muy interesante y muy inquietante cómo es que un policía tiene tanto poder, cómo es que la ley lo protege, a veces ellos siendo criminales. Yo creo que hay que concientizar a nuestra población sobre este tipo de leyes, que hay momentos que la ley dicta de que todos somos iguales bajo la ley, pero realmente veo de que bajo esta ley específico, ellos pueden hacer tantas cosas sin ser castigados. Yo creo que es una parte muy fundamental de que la gente se entere de este tipo de temas, especialmente en nuestra comunidad latina, que son los que son más afectados por los abusos de oficiales. Somos la comunidad de que somos más dañados por el Departamento de Policía. Nunca nos han puesto atención y en este proceso también hay unas cosas que son muy importantes, que he dicho de que la traducción tiene que ser muy, muy específica en lo que la persona diga para que sea digerido esta información adecuada para la población. Una de las cosas que dijo la compañera también de los paquetes de investigación internos, no están esos textos dentro del paquete en español, solo en inglés. Entonces, vemos otra vez de que en una parte siempre nos marginan y nos limitan la información. Y yo creo que eso debe de parar. Yo creo que eso tiene que cambiar. Somos personas, yo soy un ciudadano aquí y exijo también de que se respete el derecho de cada persona, no importa el color. Gracias.
Can we have the translation, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
He said, thank you and good evening to all. It is interesting and unsettling that there are laws that protect people even though there are criminals. We have to make the population aware about the laws that usually all are equal under the law except for this specific one, where the police can do so many things without reprisals. People need to know in the community, they need to know, especially the Latino community, who are most affected by the police and most hurt by the police department. No attention is paid to us. And this process needs to be explained. For example, the translation has to be faithful to what is said to get the complete information. As the other lady pointed out in the internal affairs packets, not all of it is in Spanish. We are marginalized and the information is limited to us. We need to stop this and change this. I'm a citizen and I demand respect for all people regardless of color.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from the public on this agenda item, please? Seeing none, I will close public comment for this agenda and staff, Ms. Pinion Robinson or Lieutenant Everly, if you could respond in particular about whether Spanish was in the packet on the next agenda item and the option of having PowerPoint items in the packet. And anything else that was addressed, of course.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Madam Chair. Apologies for not having the Spanish translation in the Internal Affairs manual. The translation company was not going to have it in time for the meeting. But Lieutenant Behringer is going to be going over the Internal Affairs manual in the PowerPoint. And we do know that there will be Spanish language interpretation during his presentation. But we will get both PowerPoints and the Internal Affair translated and have it published on the website.
Do you think there's a possibility when we have presentations in the future to have the PowerPoint that's going to be presented as requested? Is that possible from the speaker, depending on who it is?
We can certainly make an effort to do so. Generally speaking, the presentation is basically communicating what's in the staff report. In this case, there wasn't a staff report. And so if possible, we can work with the presenter to see if they can provide that information in advance. But certainly we'll take that under advisement in the future to get that information. We can certainly, as Lieutenant Everly said, we can post the presentation from Burke so that members of the public can review it along with the published minutes and other related documents to today's meeting.
Thank you very much. So now is it time for the committee to ask any, or to make any comments. So alternate member, well, let's do it alphabetically. We'll say Member Alm, do you have any comments or discussion?
I have no further comment. Thank you for the
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you. Member Alvarez?
No comment.
Okay. Member Davidi?
No comment.
Okay. Member Nguyen? Okay. Member Ruiz?
No comment.
No? Vice Chair Tokolai?
Just one thing. I understand the frustration around, not having the right document provided in time before the meetings for either the committee members and for the public too. I also understand there's a lot to review, to live up to the idea of if you commit a crime, you should be punished for your crime. I think it's something for us, the committee, to look into, what ways we can do to contribute to that one. It's a lot of work. I know it's not easy. Even myself, I'm struggling to catch up to a lot of this, even the language on, the Bill of Rights, when it comes to, dealing with documents. It's heavy, but we're listening, I wanted to make sure if there's anything the committee can do, with that process, anything we can do to help review these processes or.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. Actually, alphabetically, I'm next. And so I just say thank you very much for your presentation, and I hope your voice heals quickly. Alternate Member Locks, do you have any comment or question? Nothing.
Nothing in addition. I do thank you for the presentation. It did clarify some of the written documentation that was provided to us. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. And Alternate Member Valdez?
No comment, just the same. Thank you for the presentation. I think it's like, we read a lot, but listening to you, it was more like clarifying. So
Yeah.
thank you.
It's very educational.
Yeah.
And very complex. Thank you. So we'll close this presentation and thank Mr. Wilson for his great work. And next we'll call on Lieutenant Todd Berenger to please make a presentation on internal affairs. Thank you. Good night, Mr. Wilson.
Good evening. I'm Lieutenant Todd Berenger. I'm going to be talking to you tonight about police administrative investigations, also known as internal affairs investigations. And I think what Mark talked about will
Todd,
supplement.
Lieutenant, I'm sorry, one quick second. They didn't get it. I apologize. We're good to go.
So I'm going to talk to you tonight about police administrative investigations, which are also known as internal affairs investigations. And I think what Mark talked about earlier, it'll provide a little bit more context into how internal affairs investigations are conducted. So during the presentation, I'll discuss what are police administrative investigations, the legal framework that governs them, and the policies and procedures for how they're conducted. Police administrative investigations are internal investigations of police employees into alleged misconduct. They assist with determining real or potential causes of problems related to human relations and to remedy deficiencies. The goal is to clear those innocent of misconduct, establish the fault of wrongdoers, facilitate prompt and just disciplinary action, or reveal faulty practices and procedures within the organization. The importance of administrative investigations is to ensure the integrity of the department is maintained through a system of internal discipline where objectivity, fairness, and justice are assured through a thorough, impartial investigation and review process. This reaffirms police legitimacy, maintains organizational order, and helps build public trust. The purpose of this presentation is to provide an overview of the administrative investigation. There are many different laws, policies, and judicial decisions which guide how administrative investigations are to be conducted. They provide a framework to the organization, the investigators, the involved employees, and the reviewer of facts. California Penal Code 832.5 states that each agency in California is to establish a procedure to investigate complaints by members of the public against the personnel of these departments or agencies and shall make a written description of the procedure available to the public. California Government Code 3300, which is also known as the Peace Officer Bill of Rights, which Mark covered earlier, was established by the legislature that ensures stable employer-employee relations. This was the outline that was previously presented on. Lexical Policy 1011 and the Santa Fe Police Department Internal Affairs Manual also provides guidance for how investigations should be conducted. And that manual was previously provided to you in the lead up to this meeting. Administrative investigations are required to be narrow in scope, specific, and directly related to employee's performance of his or her official duties as a peace officer. This does not give the employer the right to address other issues outside the scope of the complaint. Administrative investigations are separate from criminal investigations. During the administrative investigations, investigators may compel officers to talk under the threat of insubordination. If a criminal complaint is later referred to the district attorney, this compelled statement may not be used against the officer in a criminal case. Sorry, I'm behind here. How complaints are investigated is covered in the Professional Standards Unit Internal Affairs Investigation Manual, which was included in the committee packet for tonight's meeting. This manual covers the process and forms to be used by the investigator. Complaints resulting in an administrative investigation can originate from community members, coworkers, supervisors, human resources, or anyone else. As required, complaint forms must be made available to the public. Complaints can be made in person, email, telephonically, in writing, or anonymously. Although not required, complainants are encouraged to file complaints in person, so proper identification, signatures, photographs, or physical evidence may be obtained as necessary. Once received, the complaints are logged on the internal complaint tracking form and a supervisor is notified. The complaint will be reviewed by a police administrator, typically a lieutenant or captain, to make a determination of whether a complaint is informal or formal in nature. A formal investigation will be initiated if, based on the allegation, the sustained complaint would seemingly result in discipline of a letter of reprimand or higher. For administrators, this means we need to have the end in mind. Formal complaints will be investigated by a supervisor or outside entity as designated by the division commander. Outside investigators may be used if there is a conflict of interest or the subject of the investigation is a ranking member of the command staff, such as a lieutenant or captain or chief. Once the complaint has been reviewed and assigned to an investigator, then the investigative process starts. The investigator will seek out information by first reviewing the complaint, look for potential evidence, such as body-worn camera footage, computer-aided dispatch logs, video surveillance, system entries in our CLETS computer system, police reports, etc. Subject officers may be served with a notice of an administrative investigation, which Mark touched on earlier, which will allow the involved officer an opportunity to obtain representation or legal counsel. The investigator may interview witnesses, which may include other involved officers. After gathering all the facts, the investigator may interview the subject employee. The subject employee will be served with a notice of subject interview, which Mark also touched on. The notice will detail the allegations of misconduct, along with informing the employee of their police officer of Bill of Rights. Administrative investigations should be completed within 1 year. At the conclusion of the investigation, the investigator will write a report, establish a disposition, and forward it to the lieutenant or division captain for review. The investigator will establish a disposition of unfounded, exonerated, not sustained, or sustained for each of the alleged policy violations. Depending on the severity of the offense, the city attorney may get involved. Any edits or revisions will be sent back to the investigator for corrections. If any of the allegations are sustained during a formal administrative investigation, then a notice of intent to discipline will be sent to the subject officer if the discipline is greater than a letter of reprimand. If disciplinary action is imposed, such as a suspension, demotion, or termination, then the officer has a right to a hearing. This is also known as a Skelly hearing, which Mark touched on earlier. A Skelly hearing is actually more, this is a 1975 Skelly versus the State Personnel Board judicial decision. A Skelly hearing is actually more appropriately described as a pre-disciplinary due process conference or meeting. Typically, this hearing is in front of the chief of police, a department director such as the fire chief, or city manager. After the Skelly hearing, the imposed discipline can be upheld or amended. The subject officer may appeal again to an arbitrator in accordance with the Santa Fe Police Officers Association Memorandum of Understanding for a hearing to review all of the evidence and testimony from the involved witnesses. The arbitrator will then issue a ruling. If the investigation is referred to post in accordance with Senate Bill 2, then there is a separate review and administrative hearing. Let me just touch on Senate Bill 2 because it's a newly enacted law. Also, I want to touch on complaints that may not come directly to the police department. If a complainant doesn't feel comfortable filing a complaint with the Santa Fe Police Department, the California Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training will accept complaints and forward them to the local agency for the investigation and disposition. So that might cover somebody who maybe doesn't feel comfortable or wants to file an anonymous complaint. They can do it through California Commission of Peace Officers Standards and Training. On January 1st, 2022, Senate Bill 2 established a certification and decertification program for peace officers. A peace officer may have their certification suspended or revoked if the person has been terminated for cause from employment as a peace officer or has, while employed as a peace officer, otherwise engaged in any serious misconduct. The question is, what constitutes serious misconduct? Serious misconduct is described by Post as dishonesty, abuse of power, physical abuse not limited to excessive or unreasonable force, sexual assault, demonstrating bias towards a protected class, acts that violate the law and are sufficiently egregious, participation in a law enforcement gang, failure to cooperate with an investigation into potential misconduct, or failure to intercede when present and observing another officer using force that is clearly beyond that which is necessary. I'm going to touch on records retention and access. In general, internal affairs investigations are exempt from public disclosure. There are a few exceptions, such as being outlined in Senate Bill 2. Administrative investigations are maintained for 4 years when the complainant is internal within our organization, 5 years when the civilian complaint is without a sustained finding, and 15 years when the civilian complaint is with a sustained finding as codified by law. As a recap, police administrative investigations involve a process that recognizes the rights of the involved officers, but also addresses alleged misconduct. The processes that are in place are structured by law, case law, due process, and policy. Adhering to the law and policy will allow imposed discipline to stand and not be overturned due to a procedural violation. The goal is to address the underlying behavior, either informally or formally, to maintain efficiency and order within the organization and build trust in the community. But I didn't touch on, and I realized as I talked through this, is I mostly covered formal investigation. Informal complaints do occasionally come in. It could be a misunderstanding of what the civilian may have been observing, such as parking in a red zone, without seeing maybe the officer arrive with lights or understanding that there could be potentially an emergency. It may be how they felt like they were treated, and it may just be a small policy violation. Those would be handled as informal complaints and are handled at the supervisory level. Those complaints, if written documentation of that complaint ends up in the personnel file, they will stay in there for 1 year and then are purged at the annual evaluation. I think that's addresses kind of informal complaints.
Does that conclude your presentation?
That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So now is the time for committee members to ask questions of Lieutenant Berenger. Let's see, why don't we start with Member Alm? We'll go alphabetically again.
I have none at this time.
Okay. Member Alvarez, do you have any questions? Okay. Mr. Davidi, Member Davidi?
Yes, I have a question. I'm not sure if you covered this. Let's say somebody walks across the street and files a complaint at the police department, member of the public. Do we have access to see the complaints? Are we allowed to see it?
We as in.
Let me just put just anyone from the public has access to see any complaints?
So the complainant
Yeah,
can receive a copy of their own complaint.
okay.
Yes. As far as the committee, can they see the complaints? Is that my understanding? Is that the question?
That is the question, or also anyone in the public can see complaints also that's filed? Is this something that's open to public when a
Lieutenant
complaint?
Everly, do you want to cover the complaint log and?
So we do capture all the complaints that come in. We have a system that we audit, and every year on our website, it's up right now, how many complaints that come in. And it outlines that. It just does not have like the details of the complaint or the officer's name.
Does not have the details. That's what you said?
Correct.
Is your question centered on, is the complaining party entitled to the investigation? Is that the question? Or just the complaint form?
I was just curious if we could see complaints, if made to the police department.
So like in general, if somebody walked into the police department and said, I'd like to see all your complaints, no.
Okay.
Those are confidential police personnel files essentially. But we do make an effort to share that information by publishing the log of all complaints, so people know like how many and what the tendencies are for citizens' complaints.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Nguyen, do you have any questions?
No,
Member Nguyen?
no comment.
Okay. Vice Chair Takalai, do you have any questions on this presentation?
No, I don't.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. I have none, and that would be Alternate Member Locks. Would you like to ask any questions of Lieutenant Berenger?
Yes. Chief, we brought up the person who makes the complaint. Are they entitled to know what was done with that complaint? How was it filed and looked at? I mean, did it just go in the trash?
That's a great question, and I'm remiss in not being more detailed in my clarification. All complainants receive a letter from the Office of the Chief on disposition, and that it was assigned to an investigator. And if there's any further questions or clarification, they're given a point person on command staff to follow up with. Yes.
And I was gonna, Lieutenant Berenger. And to Lieutenant, so if we see a police car parked at a red zone, we can file a complaint? If there's no activity, there's inside eating lunch, let's say?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Valdez, Member Valdez, alternate. I'm sorry, were you finished? Excuse me. Oh, do you have a question now? Please,
So
please do.
I just wonder, when the people have a, like complaints, did they have a name and, like confidential? Is it not public to the people in the public to know? Because they want to hide the information, when they complain to somebody in the office, or is that their information will be public to the everybody know?
So that's a good question. And this is why police chiefs have attorneys. I'm not going to call them up here, but I'm going to respond by saying, if somebody wanted to complain anonymously, the police department can take whatever information from that anonymous complaint and conduct the investigation. It could involve shift logs, it can involve body camera, it can involve the vehicle number, if a car was assigned and who it was assigned to. There are investigative steps that the organization can pursue in the case of an anonymous complaint. If a complainant comes in and says, hey, I have a real problem with this, I want to complain about A and B and C, but I don't want the officer to know. If that complaint is sustained and discipline is administered pursuant to the Peace Officers Bill of Rights, they have an entitlement to the full investigation.
Thank you. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, so then we're off to alternate member Valdez. Do you have any questions?
No questions at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Are there any public comments on Lieutenant Berenger's presentation?
For expediency, how about you guys line up?
Thank you.
We're on the clock.
So you each have 2 minutes.
Jason from Gerstle Park. I guess I just have a couple questions. Is an arbitration hearing on an appeal of a termination in the police officer Bill of Rights, or is it due to the memorandum of understanding with the San Rafael Police Department, which I just heard from the presentation? And if that's the case, can this memorandum of understanding policy of an arbitration appeal with the San Rafael Police Department get changed through the city council on advisement from the PAC?
Thank you for the question. Heidi, welcome.
Hello. Getting my steps in. So same kind of comments as last time, that having these 40 pages missing in the Spanish and Vietnamese packet don't allow community members to get ready. And that the PowerPoint is probably, I don't know, that was really small. I couldn't read it from my seat. But the PowerPoint might be an easier mechanism than the internal affairs investigation manual. I had a question too about, is the arbitration process the same as a civil service hearing, or is it something different that the police union in San Rafael has an agreement with the city? I think I liked committee member DeVito's question about complaints. I really think with being advisory and accountability committee, it would be great if you all could review complaints so you actually know there are many people who can't come to this meeting because they're working, because they're scared, because they're busy, who, if you knew what complaints were coming in, you would kind of have a theme of all these people are complaining about so-and-so. And then there's something that you know from the community that you can work on with the police department to build trust. So I hope that you will work on that. My last thing about translation is that this committee decided in January what the education topics were. So I don't know, Lieutenant Eberly, when the stuff went to translation, but it seems like it could have gone in January and been ready for March. So I have a question about that. And then there was a report at the last meeting by two committee members about a community meeting of leaders around a complaint around racist interactions with the police. And that was shut down pretty quick. And it was said, we'll handle this offline. I think that's the kind of thing this committee should be hearing about and working on. Your doorbell's ringing, Paula.
My apologies. Thank you for your comment. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to comment on this topic? Okay, seeing no one, we'll close the public comment and I will ask staff to respond to any of the questions and from the community in particular about the San Rafael. I should ask the chief, sorry.
No, that's quite
The
okay,
MO
Madam Chair. Thank you.
Are the difference between the arbitration with the San Rafael MOU or the POBR?
Sir, so arbitration is not codified in the Peace Officers Bill of Rights. It's a negotiated item in the San Rafael Police Association MOU with the city of San Rafael. So that could conceivably be addressed by the city council, but it would involve collective bargaining.
Okay, and what does the arbitration clause say?
It,
What are we
that-
talking about?
The arbitration as captured in the MOU is that it's a secondary, if you would consider Skelly that first appeal or that pre-disciplinary appeal, I think the attorney said that's not really a good word for it. It is a hearing,
Right.
but it's the pre-disciplinary process. Post Skelly, once the termination is prepared to be imposed, the member, as outlined in the memorandum of understanding, can appeal that final determination through a state arbitrator.
Thank you.
There was another question about arbitration versus civil service. I can't speak to civil service, but I will invite our outside counsel to maybe make a quick comment.
Yes,
Yeah, you could
please.
use the podium if that's okay,
That'd be
Brian.
great. Thank you.
Sure, committee members, I kind of addressed the whole arbitration question, kind of soup to nuts, if it's okay.
Sorry, my apologies.
Or if my time's up.
No, no.
So first, let's start with the appeal that's outlined in the Police Officer Bill of Rights. All that is an opportunity to be heard. It's the same thing that's what's called a Skelly hearing, which they would have an opportunity to usually sit down with the chief, plead their case. That is the appeal that's outlined in Police Officer Bill of Rights. It's the same thing that's outlined for all public sector employees throughout the whole entire state. They get a Skelly hearing, which came from Skelly versus State Personnel Board, which stated, hey, as a government employee, before you get terminated or before you have a suspension, you have an opportunity to be heard. And there's no formality to that. A Skelly hearing could literally be held in a parking lot with your supervisor and they hear what you have to say. Now, in MOUs, through collective bargaining, all unions, whether it's SEIU, OE3, Teamsters, you name it, they have negotiated in the state of California and nationwide to have either arbitration in their MOUs, or there is civil service rules that allow a civil service commission to have appeals. And the difference between those are just who hears it. You have an arbitrator who hears the decision. And an arbitrator, for those who aren't familiar, it's just like a courtroom. An arbitrator is a retired judge or a retired lawyer, typically hears the matter. You have opening arguments, closing arguments, and they make a decision, and it can be binding or non-binding. And a civil service does the same thing. The civil services are usually just either elected or appointed from their city employees to hear the personnel matter. So those are not specific to police officers necessarily. So if that, hopefully that answers the arbitration and civil service questions.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the only other question was back to the items of translation, which I think have been addressed by
Right, I think so.
by
too.
the liaisons.
Thank you. Let me see. So now we would move to the topic of the previous presentation from the last meeting was on a presentation by Sergeant Cordero on recruitment and retention. And now would be the time for committee members to have provide any feedback on that. So it was San Rafael Police Department's recruitment and selection plan. So I'm going to start with, at this end this time, Ms. Valdez,
Chair.
I'm
Committee.
sorry. Oh, sorry.
It's totally fine. Two things. One, if you give me just a minute to toggle the interpreters, and then when we
Absolutely.
come back, I could give the staff report as just a reminder
Yeah, be a good
and
idea.
refresher, and then we can get into it if you like.
Thank
So
you.
just give me
I
one
appreciate
minute.
it. Okay.
Madam Chair, we're ready when you are.
Well, how would you like to give us our staff report?
Yes, thank you. As you remember, last month, February 21st, Sergeant Cordero did give a presentation on recruitment and selection. This was our first community matter of concern that you guys are you will be allowed to give recommendations and feedback for the yearly report. So to just summarize, the report talked about the department's current staffing levels, demographics, overview of the department's current recruitment efforts. During the meeting, committee member Alm expressed interest in seeing the recruitment plan that was outlined in our policy. So we were able to get you a copy of that recruitment plan. That recruitment plan is a 2-year plan. It's intended to guide the police department's efforts and to recruit and attract more members. There are 6 goals outlined in your staff report very quickly that talk about recruiting and hiring a diverse workforce, optimizing technology and recruitment efforts, personalize the recruitment process, develop a recruitment brand, recruit from within, and provide recruitment incentives. Most of the background that was presented in that meeting was already presented to you. It's just those goals that were added. This part of the meeting, I just want to reemphasize, you all can give recommendations on any part of Sergeant Cordero's presentation. So it could be the first half of the recruitment plan, the second half, the goals, or anything that she presented in her PowerPoint.
Thank you very much for that report. Alternate Member Valdez, do you have any questions or comments about Sergeant Cordero's report?
Yes, I have a question, but I would like to ask the question in Spanish.
Please do.
Okay. Mi pregunta es, en el punto 1000.4.1, dice que se le da preferencia a ser contratados a los veteranos. Mi pregunta es, ¿por cuál es la razón de eso?
So my question is about, 0.1000.41. It says that veterans have a preference to be recruited. Why is that, please?
Do you have an answer to that for Lieutenant Eberly or Chief?
Yeah, I could talk about it. They're not really preferenced over maybe somebody else, but we do like to look at veterans because they are more aware and tuned with the chain of command. With high stress situations, they could deal with stress, they could deal with conflict usually more, but we do look at the total package of any individual recruit or applicant that is applying. And just because they're a veteran doesn't mean that they're automatically going to be considered.
Yes, please.
Veterans often get a preference through many occupations because they're now unemployed and they need a job. And as you had said, a lot of their skills that they gained while being in the military are easily transferable to other jobs. And so in many industries, they are given a preference. So like you say, Joe and Mary and Sam come to apply, and the veteran might get 1 extra point in their process of how they're doing it for the purposes of getting, providing employment to our veterans.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question? Thank you so much. Where we're going. So Ms. Alvarez, do you have any questions or comments about the previous presentation? Okay, thank you. Ms. Reeves?
Yes.
And feel free to.
I have one question. In the number 1000.3. All the, toda la policía que está trabajando en San Rafael son de nuestra comunidad. Porque aquí lo dice.
Are all of the police working in San Rafael from our community?
I can answer that. So not all of them live in our community, but all of them are a part of our community.
Okay.
They're here at least 10 to 12 hours a day, 40 to 60 hours a week. So they definitely are a very valued part of the community.
Thank you. Vice Chair?
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Were you finished?
Thank you.
Oh, please. My apologies. Vice Chair?
I don't have questions.
Okay,
I think my questions were answered the last time. It was, yeah.
perfect. Thank you. I just have one question as a standard, when someone leaves, whether it's retirement or to go to another agency, do you do exit interviews?
If you recall from the last presentation, we saw a significant number of departures last year,
Right.
and we wanted to know. So we created a process where employees can come to the chief and have a more structured exit interview or exit conversation, or if the reasons for leaving are centered on leadership or the chief, the department members certainly have a standing invitation to meet with the human resources director. So we've set up that process. Anybody who communicates their intent to leave the organization, I send them a personal email saying, please feel free to come see me if you'd like to talk about issues, or you're welcome to sit with the HR director. So that procedure exists.
Oh, good. I think that's helpful. Thank you so much. Member Alm?
So I had lots of questions. I did email those separately post our previous meeting. And they were all answered very satisfactorily, and I gained a lot of knowledge, and I appreciate that. If I had, and I also had some feedback on the plan, and I had a discussion with Lieutenant Eberly, and I think it was a very productive conversation that we had. Essentially, my feedback was kind of hoping for a little bit more scholarly aspect to it. When we made references to studies or things like that, I would have liked an asterisk to show me where that study material was. And we also had a conversation on, I was hoping for maybe a figure on seeing that conversion rate of the employees that were recruiting from within.
Anything else?
No.
Can I just follow up? I just wanted to add that this is a perfect example of communicating the questions. And thank you, Mr. Alm, for also bringing that back up into the public light. So anytime that you have questions, I encourage you that when I answer them, bring them back up to the meeting so that the members of the public can know what was talked about. So thank you very much.
Exactly, exactly. Everybody learns.
No more comment.
Everybody? No more comments? Thank you.
No comment, no comment.
And Ms. Locks,
I have a comment.
please.
I read the document and,
Could you speak up a little bit, please?
oh, this chair, I can't get,
Maybe the microphone could come a little.
no, they can't move.
Oh,
You pushed
I'm
me
sorry.
in. Thank you.
my apologies, sorry,
Okay.
but we want to hear.
I've been trying all night to get in. Okay. My question about recruitment and selection has to do with, I didn't see anything in the document as to how the preceptors or mentors would be chosen, because I have been in situations with lots of policies and procedures. And then when you're mentoring the person, you say, did you read the policies and procedures? And they say yes. And you say, now this is how we do it. I want to know about the cultural changes. I didn't see that in here as far as how mentors might be trained specifically. And lastly, have we actually implemented some of the activities? It's brand new. Have we started working on the activities? If you could address all of that.
Yeah, so you're looking at me, so I'm happy to answer.
know.
I didn't know if I was going to fight over the green light with Lieutenant Eberly. So you know, the conversation around training, mentoring, enculturation, I think is a good one.
Yeah.
Particularly in cases of lateral or transfer police officers who are coming from a different organization, different culture, but we're also bringing up new and inexperienced people who have not been in law enforcement before. So that role of formal training, guiding, leading, and mentoring really falls to our field training program. And we have designated field training officers who are responsible for ensuring not only that the new officers or transfer officers are able to demonstrate proficiency, officer safety, orientation, and all those things, but understand the procedures, protocols, and the culture of the organization. And all of those things, with the exception of maybe culture, are measured and evaluated on a daily basis. And then there's a biweekly review that goes up through the chain. That enculturation actually starts before the field training program, more informally through academy training, where Lieutenant Eberly in his role will identify mentors for new officers going through the academy who can pair with one designated point of contact, who have the ability to connect and relate and encourage and support and, you know, identify potential challenges in that training evolution. And all of that together, I think, would really addresses your question. Now, when you talk about culture, somebody will say, well, that's a great policy and procedure manual, but culture eats that for lunch, right? So as an officer is going through the structured field training program, there is a sergeant or a supervisor above each of those training officers to ensure that the training that's being delivered and the culture that exists within each patrol team or work unit exists and meets the standards of the organization and the standards of the police chief.
I have a follow-up question to that. As the chief of the police, of our police, have you at the leadership level communicated to the troops that it is the requirement of the community that we have and demonstrate a true cultural change? And by that change, I hope you understand what I mean by cultural change. Or do I need to spell that
No,
out?
you don't. No, you don't. So yeah, I've, when I came into the organization, I'm still the new guy. I came into the organization, I made my success for leadership, my vision for the organization, and my expectations very clear to the organization. All members of the organization were invited to come and sit to hear that one-on-one, but all supervisory and leadership members were directed to come and sit and hear that one-to-one. So when we continue to have those conversations, those expectations are clear to those who are pursuing, specialized assignments or higher roles of responsibility in the organization. They're on the walls of the police department. People understand what the expectation is.
Are those visions and expectations available to the public?
I'm happy to share with you.
I take you up on that.
Lieutenant Eberly will be happy to share that with the committee. And it's a vision, and it's centered on 4 tenets, but we'll share that with you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? No? Okay. Do any members of the public have questions about the topic of recruitment and retention? And it's a good idea if you are going to line up, that would be helpful. Okay.
Really appreciate Member Lox's questions about culture. As I go through and I see we're going to recruit applicants who represent the city's demographic, I just want to remind that it's also important to look at the demographics of the police department and who's making calls for service and who's being arrested, because there are a lot of people in our community that don't ever have any contact with the police. And so them being represented is less important than the people who have a lot of contact. And bringing in diverse people isn't going to matter if culture is eating strategy for lunch. So we know in the incident that helped bring this committee together with Julio Jimenez Lopez that Brandon Nell was a field training officer, an FTO. Corporal O'Con was a field training officer. So my question to the department is, what changes have been made to the field training officer program since this incident to make sure that that culture doesn't perpetuate? Because Corporal O'Con in court, and when he was testifying, said that he supports escalation as a de-escalation tactic. And in Chief Spiller's letter to him that's on the transparency page, it says to Brandon Nell that that's not okay. That's not in any training, and that should not be done. So I think culture keeps coming up again, and Daisy Mazariegos was from the community. She was Guatemalan and she participated in this event. So if she comes into this culture, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get better at serving the community. I think that there should be a breakdown of applicants, hires, and those passing probation, because you want to see who's applying, who's getting hired from who applied, and then who's actually making it. I think that makes a big difference. I didn't see that in the evaluation criteria. I didn't see the data about women not passing physical agility. I'll email you my comments. I do strategic planning and organizational development as my job. So I have lots of comments on the recruitment plan that I will send to you all later.
Thank you for your time. Next, please.
Hi, I'm Kalisha. I work in San Rafael, and I know some of you. I really just want to reiterate what Heidi said and thank Ms. Locks for her comments. I think the concern of some of us is that the incident that Heidi mentioned, we hear, oh, a few bad apples, right? Like it's not everyone, but I think the concern is we also know this expression, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So we really want to encourage transparency around what is being done for the culture change. There are some statistics from RIPA data that really do show how our neighbors who are Black and brown and people of color are often policed at a higher rate than those of us who are white. So we really are just wanting to stress how important it is to address the root of the issue. And I will leave it there. And thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other comments from the public on this topic? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment time. Now, does staff have any comments to respond to those points that were brought up?
I don't think so. Now I think is the time for you guys to give your recommendations that would make it into the annual report.
Absolutely. So now is the time for the committee members to give any recommendations about the recruitment and retention program for the report. Member, I'll go alphabetically. Member Alm, do you have any recommendations, please?
I spoke to them already. I think they're well documented. I don't need to
Okay.
reiterate.
Okay, thank you. Member Alvarez, do you have any recommendations?
No.
Okay. Member Davidi?
Just want to make sure I'm not ahead of myself. Are we on the action item number 5, committee reports? Is that what we're doing?
No,
I'm
we're
ahead.
before that.
Okay,
Right through.
not at
This is
this,
recommendation regarding the retention and recruitment policy that we got.
not at this point.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Nguyen?
I don't have any comment today.
Okay, thank
At
you.
this point.
You know what I did? I think I got out of order. Well, since I'm down there, Member Locks.
You're asking if there's anything we want to add? Will
If you
repeat
have
the
any
question?
recommendations to be included in the annual report that will be presented is it the end of the year?
Yeah, and the annual report, just remember, as we talked about, will be presented for you guys, for you all to approve. And so if something else comes up before the final approval, this is just the official time of giving you to give recommendations on the recruitment and selection.
Right, that's what I thought, only on the recruitment and selection. Well, I made my comments about cultural changes, and I don't know if that can be included as part of the recruitment and selection consideration for cultural awareness and change might be added in some way to this document.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Now, since I got myself out of order, did I ask you, Vice Chair Tunklai, forgive me? I did, and you're fine. And Ms. Ruiz, do you have any recommendations?
Sí, para mí es muy importante cuando ustedes seleccionen a nuevos oficiales, siempre que el entrenamiento sepan entendernos a los que vivimos en Canal, porque como ustedes saben, habemos muchos latinos, sobre todo más guatemaltecos, mexicanos y de otros pocos. Pero es muy importante conocernos a nosotros, cómo nos comunicamos con las palabras y también cuando se presenten, pues que sean más amables, porque ver un oficial en la comunidad La verdad sí nos da miedo a veces, pero sí necesitamos que sean un poco más amables con nosotros, sobre todo que estamos en otro país muy diferente al nuestro. Nos estamos acoplando, claro, y pues sí, a mí sí me gustaría que le pusieran más atención en la cultura de nosotros de Canal. Gracias.
Yes, I think it's important when you're selecting a new officer in the training to understand those of us who live in Canal. There are many Latinos there from Guatemala, from Mexico, from other countries, but it's important to know us, how to communicate with us with words. When you introduce yourselves, be friendlier. Many times we are fearful when we see officers in our community, so be nicer to us. We come from other countries, and this country is different from ours. We are getting used to it, but just paying more attention to the culture in Canal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Chair, can I just
Oh, absolutely.
interject one quick thing? Ms. Ruiz, that was a great statement. And it goes, actually, it's a good segue because it is a little bit of recruitment, but it is more for training. One of the topics that you chose as a community area of concern is training. So I'm going to make a note about that, and then we can bring it back up during the training topic as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a great suggestion, and then obviously training about different cultures that are in our community should be included, and I think it's a very good suggestion. I don't, any other committee members have a comment?
No,
I think I got
thank you.
everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, so now would be the time for the staff report, if you have it. Is that correct? We're on number 4 now. If staff has any updates.
Staff has no report.
Okay, so now would be the time for committee members to give any updates on conferences or seminars or activities they've participated in. I think if we each take just a few minutes would be fine, and if we need more time, we can do that. So how about I'll start down with alternate member Locks. Is it? Yeah, right.
Okay.
Keep you on your toes.
Yes. Oh, I got the date. On March 10th, I'm part of the Age Friendly San Rafael Committee, and we celebrated members of our community that are age 90 and better. And the eldest was 105, female. And I said, next time we need to know who was the eldest, how old was the eldest male? There were approximately 90 folks there. But of importance, Mayor Kate was there to give a proclamation celebrating the San Rafael community members aged 90 and better. And so, you know, there was the proclamation. Yeah. Secondly, on Sunday, March 17th, I attended the second annual Marin Powwow. And this is the second one that was in San Rafael. This one was held at the Terra Linda High School. And I recommend that everybody has an opportunity for the third one to make sure you're there, because the hoop dance and the aesthetics, say it, I can't say it unless I read it. The ones with the feathers and beautiful Aztecs, thank you. That is so special. I mean, it's so special. And I think the more that we engaged in learning about other cultures, the better we become as individuals and as a community. And lastly, I'd like to say there was, just to address the article that was in the San Rafael, that was in the, this was February the 9th, that was published in the IJ that commented on our proceedings. I hope everyone gets a chance to read that, and I am disappointed that there weren't copies of the correspondence that did come, that was not present for us to have a few copies. And I would recommend that we have that for future. I didn't get a chance to download them, the correspondence that comes in. Yeah, aren't we supposed to have access to that?
Yes.
Yes.
It wasn't,
That's what, You said there was nothing out there.
Okay, it will be published. I apologize that the copies weren't out there. They might have been out there and they all got taken, but it will be published. You
Okay, because I think some of what we do and learn comes from the comments from the community, and there were significant comments in those correspondence that we might want to address going forward.
And I'm sorry, just to clarify, you didn't get the email that I
So I
sent?
got
to-
the emails. I
Okay,
didn't print them down. is
Oh,
what I'm
gotcha.
saying. So I did. 'Cause
okay,
I like to reference. Yeah,
okay.
yeah, I did get them. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Member Nguyen, do you have any report about what
No,
you've done?
no, at this time.
Okay, thank you. Member Davidi?
Yes, I do. I just want to say I had the privilege last week. I was invited by Lieutenant Eberl to attend an oral hearing, interview, with different potential police officers. I was very impressed, for many reasons. One was that I felt very up to par with other interviewers who were conducting the interview. At one point, I gave Lieutenant Eberl some feedback on one of the questions. I wanted some revisions be made, so it was more clarity around diversity, immigrants, and you were very receptive to it. Also rearranged one of the questions. That was very helpful. I also went in, I think, Heidi, you mentioned something on our second visit. You're not only looking for diversity of staff, but more cultural change, whoever comes in to have more sense of that. So I kind of was really wearing my pack hat, making sure not only, looking what's best for the entire San Rafael, because sometimes when you recruit police officer, but also, the canal, and I ranked my top 3 choices, and I was impressed that my fellow, all the interviewers were all on the same page. So it was nice to see that the way I was kind of, capturing who my top 3, 4 were. And the rest of the team that was there, that was member of the police department, they were the same. So that was like very validating to know we're on the same page. So I just want to thank you for being receptive and having me there. And I also want to know today is the first day of spring, is also the Persian New Year. So just want to say shout out to that. And with that, I'll throw it to Daniel.
Here. I have a few things. As president of Western Neighborhood Association, I would like to extend a heartfelt gratitude from the association board and our residents to Detective Duncan and Detective Agar. A few weeks ago, they were the special guest at an annual meeting for the Western Neighborhood, presenting on crime statistics within our neighborhood and how to increase our safety and security. Detectives Duncan and Agar are truly community assets. We are really lucky to have them. Continuing on Western Neighborhood Association, one of our board members just completed the first of several training seminars for the Community Police Academy. The report back to me was extremely positive and enlightening. I think it's a wonderful outreach program that we have going on, and I encourage more community members to participate in that. I want to give a thank you to Chief Spiller for meeting up with me for the other week for coffee. It was great to build one-on-one dialogue with you. I look forward to continuing that conversation and encourage other PAC members to engage with Chief Spiller. He's an easygoing guy. Also, I've been seeking to continue gaining more perspective and context with the Canal neighborhood. This morning, I met one-on-one with Omar Carrera of Canal Alliance. Certainly, Omar does not speak for everyone in the community of the canal, but he does have interesting insight on the root cause of issues in the canal neighborhood. And I was very, very grateful for his time. That's all I have for update.
Thank you so much. Do you have any report, Member Vice Chair?
I do, just a few things.
Sure.
I'm a huge advocate for young people, up and coming. I want to see them on every platform, building the now instead of waiting for tomorrow. I work with a lot of young Latinos. Some of them live in the canal. Some of them live in different cities, but still in the county. and it's something that I encourage them to speak up, participate, encourage their fellow friends and the neighbors to do the same thing. Of course, their views are all different because the young people, whether they're on it or they're on the fence or they just don't know anything about it. But I've been meeting with a lot of them one-on-one and in different groups. I'm spending a lot of time in the canal, whether it's shopping. My mother-in-law lived there, so I took my girls over there all the time to shopping and hang out. I'm hanging out with the neighbors now. And I also invite some of these Latino families to the house. They made awesome food for me and my family, and we just love them for doing that. And just the idea is just getting the conversation going, cultures. Like, I'm Pacific Islanders, so I'm learning from, we do the same thing, but they're doing it, their approach is different from my approach. So it's the same way with, open discussions, I could be very vocal and like, all right, let's do it. Let's go for it. Some of them might be like holding back. They're like, I'm afraid of saying this, like, who's watching? Are there any of the elderly folks are in the room? Like the younger folks might be like, no, I'm not going to say it because that's my uncle sitting in the corner. He's going to smack me after, So the cultural differences, but we're learning from each other. To me, it's an ongoing process, and I'm still pushing for these young people to like come forward, participate in a lot of what they want to see in the city. It's on them, don't wait for tomorrow. Like just come forward and participate, be part of it now. So that's what been, going on. And the last thing, like there's a lot of questions raised about surveys. Is there any way like citywide correspondence or surveys? No. So surveys in the way, because a lot of these folks, they don't want to be seen because a lot of them have that fear factor, but they also, at the same time, they wanted their opinions to be heard in any platforms. So a lot of questions raised about, conducting surveys on paper or online, Today, like all these young folks, they can access everything online, and if there's any way the city can draft like surveys of like, this is what you want to see in your city, and then there's a survey out online, like anyone can access that. Or on paper, we can do outreach, the committee members can do that, when we do one-on-one, so. Yeah.
Thank you. Every time you speak, I want to cheer. Member Ruiz, do you have any, please?
Sí, yo sí tengo. Yo estoy en el grupo de embajadores comunitarios que está trabajando con Multicultural y Canal Alliance. Estamos trabajando en preparación de emergencias y actualmente ando tocando puertas para que tengan los vecinos el alerta marín. Estamos trabajando en eso. Pero el grupo que estamos les hacen el recordatorio y recomendaciones a la policía de que siempre se necesita más presencia en el canal y ellos siguen pidiendo la convivencia con el cafecito, los oficiales y la comunidad, que sean más amigables y que haya control en la hora de los bases que vienen a recoger a los niños de la escuela, que haya presencia policíaca porque no respetan las personas que van manejando. También piden medidas estrictas para los que toman alcohol, que les pongan ticket, porque a veces están tomando en la calle. Otro es que cuando se llame por un reporte de vandalismo, que le valoren ese reporte, que exista ese reporte. Y también me pidieron, donde hacemos las juntas en multicultural, que hay personas afuera tomando, que por favor, si se les puede retirar, porque para nosotros es difícil entrar y hay personas tomando ahí. Y también quieren charlas informativas y hay otra compañera que pidió presencia en Lincoln y Laurel porque están construyendo y a veces hay un poco de peligro en esta esquina. Muchas gracias.
Yes, I do have some things. I am part of the Community Ambassador Group for Multicultural and Canal Alliance. I'm part of a committee that goes around and talks about the Marin Alert with the neighbors. And the group has asked for reminders to the police to have more presence in Canal. Both the police and the community want to do the cafecitos for them to be friendlier and for there to be more police presence for when the school buses are active, because there isn't enough. Also, because the drivers don't respect the traffic laws around the school buses. Also, for people who are drinking on the street to get ticketed. Also, if there's a report of vandalism, to have that report be valued, to have it exist. When there are multicultural meetings, sometimes there are people drinking outside and it's hard for us to enter. Also, to have more police presence around Lincoln and Laurel because they're doing construction there and it's dangerous. That's it.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I get
Yes,
2
you can.
seconds? This will be quick.
Please.
Okay, sorry about that, and thank you.
Thank you. Member Alvarez, do you have anything to report?
I've talked to fellow neighbors and their main problem or concern was about police. They have really a lot of fear with the police. And so they fear that like they're unable to go forward and speak with their concerns, also with related to Darlin about the cultural that we grew in. Because most grew up with fear of the police. And so, and also those who don't speak English, to have understanding and patience with those people. Yeah.
Thank you for your comments.
I don't have any reports.
Okay, thank you. I'll just say that for me, I had plans to meet with Ms. Simonini from the Canal Alliance, and unfortunately she got a cold. So we are meeting tomorrow. Let me see. So now would be the time for, I guess we're in no more comments from the committee. Okay, so if there, this would be the time for the public to make any comments on whatever topic they choose. So if anybody would like to come forward, if you want to kind of line up, that would be helpful to save time. We're actually almost on time. Yeah. Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Florencia Parada and
I think the other microphone is the one that works.
You're good. You're good.
You're good.
I don't have my glasses, so I just.
But we can see you, so it's great.
I have a loud voice, so.
That's fine.
My name is Florencia Parada, and I'm here because first I just wanted to thank Carla Valdez and Darlene Ruiz for their commitment I know them, I know their work, and I know their commitment to find solutions so that we can, as a community, develop equitable process, right? An equitable process, an inclusive process that works for everyone involved. I also believe in your stories and your powerful stories and your experiences and knowledge as a community members. And I also witness your advocacy efforts to unify our community voice. So as I said before, so then we can together build healthier, inclusive ways to approach difficult and very traumatic situations. It is important for me to transform the narrative so then we can stop fighting with each other. It is important for me to also value everyone's stories, no matter where we come from, no matter how we look like. It is important that it can be in both sides. At the same time, we value the stories of the people who are in front of you. At the same time, I value the stories that you all share, including the police officers. I might not be liked by many by saying that, but I do believe everyone deserves the same respect. Everyone also is human, and if we can talk about humanity and really based on our humanity and our values, we can definitely start working to respect everyone's voice, not just one side, but everyone. So then together, we definitely can build that solutions that we all looking for. Another part that is important for me, I would love to hear more or learn more about the field training program. If there is a presentation about that, that will be helpful. I will definitely know more. I would like to know more about the cultural change practices. Definitely also as a part of an inclusivity in this committee. And when we present to the community, translation, interpretation is super important. So then we can build trust and transparency in this community. I know it's challenging, but at the same time, I know if we're talking about language access and justice, let's really think about this. So then, now that you hear for a long time that we need to have translation and interpretation services that are accurate, that definitely are justice, give justice to our comments, let's start having it from the next month and not have more excuses because it's important to build that trust. But I appreciate you. I appreciate your efforts. I appreciate everyone here. And I love your stories. Keep sharing your stories, no matter where you come from. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we totally agree about the interpretation. It's frustrating for all of us, but thank you for your comments. Heidi?
Thank you. I just want to echo everything she said about language liberation. I'm going to try to speak in Spanish so the people who speak English can see how hard it is to participate in this meeting when it's not your first language. Accurate translation hasn't been consistent and should improve so all members are included. Muy buenas noches a todos. Mi nombre es Heidi. Mis valores son amor, justicia, dignidad y liberación para mí y para todos. Tenemos una oportunidad increíble de hacer un cambio con y para nuestra comunidad. Los policías prometen proteger y servir la comunidad. En pocas palabras, la comunidad quiere ser tratada con dignidad y respeto. Incluso si han cometido un error o han hecho algo ilegal. La comunidad quiere transparencia y poder confiar en la policía. Mucha gente estaba asustada antes de la brutal golpiza en el canal y ahora está más asustada aún. Y está preocupada por el proceso confidencial y secreto que la ciudad de San Rafael tiene con el sindicato policial. Lo confidencial no es transparente. El exoficial Brandon Neal está tratando de recuperar su trabajo con este proceso. Ustedes han dicho que quieren escuchar a más y a diferentes miembros de la comunidad. Algunas personas tienen miedo de asistir a la reunión de PAC. Algunas personas tienen muchos trabajos y no pueden venir. Parte de su responsabilidad es salir a la comunidad. Por favor, piensen en cómo centrar las voces de las personas más afectadas negativamente por la policía en San Rafael en su trabajo con el PAC. Gracias.
Thank you. We'll wait for the Please.
My name is Heidi, and basically I want to report that the community in San Rafael, and especially in the Canal, doesn't trust the police. We are very concerned about the brutal incident at the Canal, and that's why we need to understand the transparency on this process. Transparency doesn't mean confidentiality. So a lot of documents are confidential and we don't have access. Please keep an eye on our community and let's keep working together on this.
Thank you. Well, we understand your concern. Mr. Saris?
Okay. Okay, great. So I just want to bring up the point. The reason I brought up, you know, the arbitration on appeal and the memorandum of understanding with the San Rafael Police Department is because, you know, Brandon Nail is, you know, lodged an appeal request, and you know, it's something that he's got the right to do. And, you know, I didn't know if the memorandum of understanding, there'd be a way for you to advise the city, hey, this isn't good because this former police officer is actually charged with felonies, and a trial date hasn't even been set, and then he has a chance to be rehired in the San Rafael Police Department, you know, depending on how the appeal goes. So, you know, maybe if the PAC could get like a copy of the memorandum of understanding, you know, and I know it would be hard to change with the collective bargaining, union being involved, but there's, you know, I was thinking, you know, there might be ways you could crack the code, so to speak, you know, and what you really want to do is advise the city, and hold police accountable. And so that there's not any injustice enacted on residents of San Rafael, you know, particularly of underrepresented communities. And so that's what I'd like to see the PAC do is just, you know, the more you know, the more you may be able to find a way to enact change, to change policy, or, you know, so that's what I had to say.
Thank you. I'm sure we can put that topic on our list to be, you know, one of the topics in the future.
Okay, great.
Okay. Oh, yes, someone else, please. Hi.
It's this one, right?
Yes.
Oh, that's like really up here. So I'll just bring it down. Hello, everyone. My name is Alexandra. I'm really excited to be here. It is my first meeting, and I'm just bearing witness of what it looks like to co-create change. And I'm really, you know, one of the things that I always ask myself is, how do we heal Marin? How are we getting to the root cause of what has really happened in our communities? And I'm hoping that the committee is able to look at what are the root causes of why there is the injustices in the community and hold them and know that there are many polarities that we have to work through, and we have to work through different people with different people and co-create those solutions together. There's an opportunity to always problem solve together. And it was interesting because Paulo Freire, he wrote something about education and how it is that we can have agency and come together and problem solve. And that is the biggest innate power that any citizen, any member can have. I just want to really honor the space that we are in right now and the opportunity to look at how are we creating that change and really honoring each other's voice. I know it was painful, very painful what happened. But how do we really come together to heal that? Because a colleague of mine at school said, there's so much complexity right now. It's so difficult. There's fire out there. There's so much fire, but we don't need fire to meet fire. We need water. Each and every one of us need water. We need buckets and buckets of water. So I leave you with that, to think about that and hold space for that. How do we move and flow with each other? That's an opportunity as we are creating futures for our communities. And I also wanted to share that as best as we're all working together and looking at language translations and how do we communicate, we were just listening to the translation and the interpretation. And I know he meant to do well, but it wasn't the right messaging as Heidi was saying it. And so I believe that in that, just wanted to make a point that there is, you know, it gets lost, right, in translation. And so being mindful of like, you know, who is interpreting, and how are we interpreting materials, and just wanted to highlight that. So thank you. Thank you, Chief. Thank you for being here, committee, and, you know, the community that's here. It's such a dynamic process and so much complexity, but we're here together, and that's for our community. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Yes, please. Hello.
Hi, everyone. So I feel super stressed. My voice is shaking a little bit because being in this room reminds me of when we came to show support for Mateo. And I just want to take a moment to remind us of the lifelong impact that he's going to live with from that brutal attack that was that we all witnessed on social media. So I think it's super important to like center ourselves in what brought this pact upon or to become a reality. And I had taken a step back from participating in these things because it's so stressful to see injustice after injustice after injustice, even in the process of trying to come up with solutions. The makeup of this board, who's sitting on it, how it came to be, like there's just a lot of things that are not, in my opinion, right. And so I want to also talk a little bit about my passion for young people and how I really care deeply about young people and have many years working with them. And a lot of them do not like the police. They don't feel protected by them. They're growing up in an age where they have access to so much information and are able to develop their own critical thinking skills. And they actually give me a lot of hope. And so I just want us to be mindful that while we can be part of different communities, none of us, including myself, can speak. I can't speak for all young people. I can't speak for all Latinos. Like that's just not how things work. And we really have to just remember that, especially like within the Latino community, like even the people that have gotten up here and spoken, we have very different values and very different ideas of what can be possible. I genuinely believe that you cannot reform a system that has for hundreds and hundreds of years been racist and unjust. And so while you can try to have little band-aids and you can try to come up with things, at the very root, the police is a racist institution that has caused a lot of harm, that has killed people. And while there may be some people that became officers for good reason, they themselves cannot wipe away all of the harm that has been done to people. The other thing is that there's generational issues. So even within the Latino community, like I myself was born here, I have very different ideas than my mom, who's an immigrant. And so like we just have to be really careful and approach this in a way that reflects all of the different dynamics within our community, because we individual people cannot speak for thousands of people. Is my time up? Yeah, sorry.
Well, thank you for your comments. I don't see any other people coming up, so I will close public comment and the meeting is adjourned. See you all. Well, actually, I won't be here next month, so Vice Chair is going to run the meeting. But thank you all for your time.